Hey everyone, Deprestior here, and I'm just going to be doing a first session overview of an upcoming Pathfinder campaign that my friend Wes is going to be running. So this is just going to be me and some military buddies, so it's very similar to the last Pathfinder group, though there's a few people missing and a few new people, so we'll you'll get to hear from them as we go along. But for this first little part, it's just going to be me kind of talking about the general rules and setup of this campaign, as well as a brief summary of the first session. I decided to go ahead and scrap the recording of the first session. First of all, I was still kind of getting things set up, getting volume levels somewhat good, and my setup wasn't exactly perfect. And also, one of our players was actually drunk. I'll let you guess who. So I'm going to probably just do a brief overview of that and kind of just get that up to speed. After that, starting with session 2 and onwards, the video should go as normal. There'll be obviously some edits and cuts for long pauses and breaks and anything else that ends up becoming side banter. For the most part, this campaign will be I feel like it's going to be a little bit more coherent than our last one. Our last one kind of just fell apart, unfortunately. Some people kind of flipped out and left. Well, flipped out, did crazy stuff in-game, and then left. And we decided to go ahead and just scrap it. Also, due to various schedule issues and real-life issues, Wes hasn't been able to actually run anything until recently. So we decided to go ahead and start with this pirate campaign. It is a... I don't know if it's actually called this, but at least what we have the module name is Skull and Shackle Pirates. I don't know if that's the actual name of the adventure. This is a pre-made adventure. Wes has run it before, though not to completion. His last group were pretty crazy as well, but he's got experience running it, and there's also a lot of fancy things that make it very, very simple to run. As for the overall kind of, I guess, feel of the game, of this campaign rather, it's, at least in the beginning, it's very, very mechanical. As far as like what you do, day by day, which I'll go into a little bit in a bit. But a lot of the conversations, I guess the role playing, I guess you can say, in the beginning is a little, casual. I guess is probably the best word to say. I can't really, maybe shorthand, I guess is probably a better term, where we kind of give a summary of what we're wanting to discuss with a particular NPC. And for the most part, sometimes it kind of converges into an actual conversation. Other times it's like, okay, you find out this. Part of the reason is, of course, there's a lot of NPCs on this ship, which I'll get into in a little bit. But yeah, for this, as far as the campaign itself, the idea is the party members have been abducted into and essentially forcibly drafted into a pirate crew, and so we end up just starting out with no gear at level 1, and obviously we don't have any way to overpower a 30-person crew. A 30-person armed crew, that is, and have no choice but to kind of obey the wishes of the captain and them, and kind of start taking their roles on the ship. So yeah. As for what the campaign intends, is the idea is eventually, due to the captain's behavior and stuff like that, eventually the party is going to want to mutiny and take over the ship themselves, and then at that point they'll start going down essentially a plot line where they try to become actual, what they call free captains. This is Pathfinder, so it is in the Pathfinder world setting. It takes place in a place known as the Shackles, which is kind of just like a big... it's a section of sea that's pretty much it's pretty much the most chaotic neutral area of the seas. It's run by a bunch of what they call free captains, and there's it's Pirate Central, to say the least. As for anything else, I'm not really sure what to describe. At least when I asked Wes some questions about the campaign itself, it seemed like it becomes a lot more open once you take over the ship. This is not really spoilers. it's literally part of the campaign. But as for like how you become a free captain, it seemed like there's some open options, though I'm not exactly sure what to expect from that. As for character creation, which I'll go into a little bit more detail, just in general, all of us kind of built our characters around the idea of taking over a certain role on the ship. For example, my character I intend on becoming the navigator. I'm hoping to not become the captain, though we'll see how that goes. Currently, we have Cahoon as our captain, I believe, which we'll hide those. Yeah, the idea is Cahoon, who's going to be played by Chris, is supposedly going to become the captain. We'll see how that goes. Marcus is going to be played by Dustin. You guys have probably heard from Dustin a few times. He was in both my Pathfinder campaign, both the Pathfinder campaign and the 5th edition campaign I ran. And Ragnar is going to be played by Dwayne, and Dwayne was in our Pathfinder campaign. Obviously, I've been in both, and Wes was the DM for our last Pathfinder campaign, and will be the DM for this one. Anyway, let's go ahead and just talk a brief moment about what we got going here. As for the campaign information, all right. So it's just talking about the Shackles. It's chaotic neutral. The capital is Port Peril, which is where we started and where we got abducted. Population, blah, blah, blah. It's talking about the various notable settlements. Talks about the ruler, who's essentially just a pirate. There's a new language known as polyglot, but I don't know if that's actually going to be an issue. The government's nothing but free captains, and it's just talking about how it's just a chain of islands just south of the big, never-ending whirlpool storm thing that's in the ocean. And pretty much it's Pirate Central. There's regular attacks, and all that fun stuff. The idea is we stayed at a certain tavern and pretty much got drugged or knocked out and thrown into a pirate ship. All right. As for let's go ahead and quickly go over some of the house rules. So let's start with the DM's gift. DM's gift was brought up last Pathfinder campaign. Originally, he wasn't going to bring at him, but he decided to go ahead and go with it. It's pretty much all the same stuff. Some of the usual ones have been missing. Those were usually the ones that we never took anyway. So he kind of wants to figure. Wes does kind of want to think of more DM's gifts. Some of the suggestions I threw out was obviously feats from like 5th edition, simply because they're kind of very similar in their power level as far as DM's gifts go. But we didn't really close in on any of them. For the most part, I think most people picked like things like bonus feats or extraordinary skill, which is actually a little bit different from our last Pathfinder campaign, where most people picked extraordinary combat prowess. In my case, I usually pick extraordinary skill because I like being a skill monkey. But in this particular playthrough, I am actually going with bonus feats, so I could get an additional feat at 1st, 5th, 10th, 15th, and 20th. So if you notice, I have some extra feats despite my race. That is the reason. So that is pretty much all there really is to say about DM's gifts. It's just a thing we pick, kind of like a bonus thing. I don't know what everyone else picked, but I know at least one person picked extraordinary skill. Everything else, it's I don't know. I think someone might have taken combat prowess. I wouldn't be surprised. Anything else, I don't think there's been anything along those lines. So go ahead and drop that window. Also, I kind of set up my window a little bit different, so now you can't just see my freaking taskbar or my what tabs I have open. Throughout the game, I will be switching tabs, obviously, to kind of look at rules or look at maps and things like that. Anyway, now the hero point system was something we brought up in the previous Pathfinder playthrough. The hero point system was interesting. I mean, we definitely didn't have any issues with it. The biggest issue with the hero point system was it was too hard to get more hero points. The way it worked originally, at least in the previous Pathfinder game and all other games I played with Wes all throughout the years, usually it was you get 1 hero point, and all you can use that hero point for was essentially these super things, like you can make a hit become a crit, you can maximize the effect of like your damage, or automatically succeed in a skill, or ignore an effect that would kill you, or at least one effect that will kill you, or take an additional action. Now the problem was, since you only got 1, at least in the previous games, most people just held on to them and waited and used them only to cheat death, essentially. So if they were ever about to be knocked unconscious or something from an attack, they'll just negate it, and that was it. And that was usually it, because it was really hard to get hero points, unfortunately. I think in all my times playing prior to this campaign, the only time I never used cheat death for a hero point was I actually maximized the damage of a spell. And it was more just kind of just story reasons, because I knew it wasn't going to kill the guy anyway. this time it's a little bit different. The hero point system functions very much like, if anyone's actually familiar with other tabletop games, it functions very similar to the fate point system in games like Dark Heresy and Rogue Trader, which are Warhammer 40k type games. So the way it works is, instead of having one hero point, we start out with 2. And we have 2 uses for hero points now. We can do a temporary daily use, which allows you to reroll any d20 roll. So you can reroll a skill check, an attack, a saving throw, things like that. Now the catch, of course, is if you can only reroll a roll once, and whatever reroll result you get, you have to take that result. They get refreshed essentially every day, so every time you do a full rest or whatever, you'll get your daily uses back. Now you get as many daily uses as you have hero points, and so at the start you'll have 2 hero points, which means you have 2 daily uses. Now the other thing you can do is you can permanently burn a hero point, which functions very similar to how hero points have worked before. And the only other, so the big thing about burning hero points is not only are you permanently losing a hero point, you're also reducing your temporary uses, which is a small catch. Now, yeah, in fact, it even says it up here, Warhammer and Shadowrun type games. Yeah. Anyway, now one thing to note is every time we level up, we get a hero point. So no matter what, we'll get a hero point when you level up. The maximum that we can have is 3 points. So if you have 3 hero points and you level up, you just wasted a hero point. He's also been a little bit more lenient, or he's a little bit more lax, I guess, and say about when he gives out hero points for certain heroic actions. Sometimes it's just goofy stuff that makes everyone laugh and joke around. Other times it's just an actual heroic action, like trying to save a drowning person type thing. So for the most part, it's a little bit easier to get hero points. Definitely got no complaints there. Also, since it's a little bit easier to get hero points, players are a lot more willing to burn hero points for something other than negating damage, which is really good. I mean, that was also kind of an issue in the previous, like I mentioned before. A story that Wes will usually tell is talking about he's apparently given out 2 hero points prior to this change. And one of those times he gave it to someone for doing a heroic action, essentially, and that person ended up burning a hero point just to climb up a rope, and then he kind of got lost. His soul kind of got crushed at that point. But you'll hear that story plenty of times, probably, because I'll probably leave it in the recording. But yeah, I do like this new system. I think everyone likes it. It makes it so people have more uses for using hero points. It also makes the game a little bit more forgiving, simply because how RNG Roll20 could be when it's with its die rolls and stuff. It really sucks when you just roll a natural 1 on a very key point, and it kind of just pretty much screeches the game to a halt simply because no one was expecting you to fail that. Anyway, so yeah, that was the gist of it. Sorry if it was a little wordy. But that was probably the biggest change from the previous game, so I wanted to go ahead and mention it. It's also, we kind of mention them a lot, so we use hero points very often since they get refreshed daily when you use the temporary uses. Other thing to note that's not really listed here is in the previous Pathfinder game, we had action points, very similar to what Eberron had in Dungeons & Dragons. We are not using action points this time around, so we don't. That system is gone. Pretty much what's replaced it is this temporary hero point system. Anyway, takes care of that. Alright, next major change is the skill system. So the biggest issue with the skill system in Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 is there's just so many of them. And Pathfinder actually has some rules about how to... they had 2 different rule changes, or optional rule changes for skills. One is called Consolidated Skills, which the idea behind Consolidated Skills is it takes a bunch of individual skills and combines it into one. So for example, Acrobatics, Escape Artist, Fly, and Ride used to be different skills, which, I mean, that means you're essentially splitting your points into 4 different skills if you want all of them. Now you just have to spend 1 skill point on a skill group called Acrobatics. So the idea is that. Now, there's also another change you can do. It's called Background Skills, where every time you level up, your skill points plus 2 background skill points, and those background skill points can only be used on background skills. So the idea behind this is it kind of gives you some points that you can actually spend on more, maybe perhaps less effective things, and makes it so you can just, flesh out your character a little bit more with, skills that usually don't actually do anything for combat. Now, what Wes decided to do is he actually combined both of them. So he kind of made up his own little skill group. He kind of tweaked it a little bit, and then he added a bunch of background skills. So essentially what we're doing is consolidated skills and background skills together. So if you notice, whenever I do skill checks, a lot of times I'm scrolling all the way to the bottom of my skill list, and that's because all the custom group skills that we've created are on the bottom. There's been changes to the Roll20 character sheets for Pathfinder where you can actually do consolidated skills, but you can only do one or the other. You can't do both at the same time. So we're kind of stuck using the little skill groups, and then anything that's actually a regular skill on this character sheet, I usually use those by themselves. Anyway, but yeah, as it specifically says in here, these are custom made a little bit. They're tweaked. So if you're referring to anything that's on the actual Pathfinder websites and stuff, they're not going to match what tables we're using. And of course, he had to set up class skills for everybody, which was a little bit more difficult since most people were various offset classes rather than core classes. So here's just kind of the general idea. These are now what are classified as class skills, and same thing for background skills. Also, you can see what exactly is in our party. We have a fighter, a gunslinger, a swashbuckler, and a witch. I am playing the witch, so I'm the only caster in the group, which is no surprise to anybody. All right. There is a new skill as well from these skill changes known as lore, which is kind of like a weird. It's like a very. I don't want to describe it. Lore is like a knowledge skill. It's like a generic knowledge skill that you can. Well, sorry, it's a focused knowledge skill essentially. Like instead of having like knowledge dungeoneering and stuff, you can essentially have something that's very specific, like lore. In the case of my witch, I have local covens. So with lore local covens, I know where some local witch covens are in the Shackles. So that's some ideas. Some of the other things you can be like lore, history, history for a specific city type thing. Yeah, so it's things like that. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. I do like the skill changes, mainly because the biggest issue I have with skills is there's so many of them, and they're all very specific, and you don't get that many skill points. As a witch, you get 2 plus your int modifier, which is only 7, and yeah, it's pretty rough. With this, I can actually, having 5 plus 5 int modifiers actually matter, and actually, make it so I can actually do stuff with my skills. Beyond that, yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and just jump on through. Sorry if this is a little long. Like I said, there's a few little rule changes. Let's go ahead and jump into the ship stuff, actually. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, we already talked about the shackles. Okay. So I mentioned before this was stuff about we're forced into labor, forced into working in a pirate crew. And so the way I mentioned it was also very mechanical, at least in the beginning. And that's because essentially we don't really have very much control over our characters as far as like, well, we can resist and stuff, but that's not a good idea. So really we're each kind of given task, and it's randomized every day. And the way it works is we'll do various skill checks and, various stat checks for the jobs we're doing for that day. And then after we make those rolls, we actually decide what to do for our action. And so there's a daytime action, nighttime action. There's a few other extra things you can also do, but that's kind of the general idea. So every day you're going to do a daytime action, which involves, doing your specific task and then doing something else to kind of help yourself get a little bit more ready to do things involving the ship. So as far as your daytime actions, you can work diligently, which you can. If you do that, you're just essentially focusing on your daily task, and you're just going to increase one of your skill checks by 4. So if you're feeling like you don't want to get lashed, because failing checks generally earn you lashes, which is a bunch of non-lethal damage that can knock you unconscious. And yeah, it's just a way of being the or if you just want to really do good on your job, that's an option for work diligently. A very common action that we usually take is influence and sneak. Influence is you do your normal skill checks for the daily task, and then you attempt to influence a single NPC. Now, the NPCs that are available for influence kind of depend on what sort of job you're doing and the time of day. For example, right now my character is a cook, so it's either I'm on deck fishing or I'm in the kitchen cooking. So if I'm in the kitchen cooking, I'm probably not going to be able to do much with involving the swabs up on deck, but I could do some influence with the quartermaster that's next door. Those are some obvious things. And obviously, if you try to do like influence with the captain or something, it'll probably be a lot more difficult and probably will not go well for you if you're just aiming for the top. Sneak, despite what it's named, it's essentially you're doing a normal check and then you're kind of just exploring an area of the ship. Of course, the area you explore kind of depends on where you're close by. You can shop, which is you take a -2 penalty to all checks for a daily task and visit the quartermaster store. So essentially you don't do as well in your task, you're kind of shirking your duties a little bit, and you're immediately going to the quartermaster to kind of barter and trade. You can either spend money or you can trade items that you have to get other items. At the start of this campaign, we have no gear, so it's gonna, for the most part, there's no real point in going shopping until you actually have something to work with. Obviously, getting back your own gear is actually part of the gameplay for this, so some of us will be working towards getting that as well. So as you can kind of see from the actions, essentially we're trying to get information about the ship, trying to get our shit back so we can actually fight, and also trying to talk and learn about the crew and kind of what's going on between the officers and the swabs and the riggers, and you're trying to get influence with the rest of the crew. So when game time happens and we actually want to do a mutiny, we have people to back us up. Because if we don't, it's just going to mean there's a lot more people against us than for us. And then for the nighttime action, when it hits nighttime, we have to do a rum ration, which we'll talk about in a bit, and then we can take an action. If you sleep, you just automatically recover fatigue. So if there's ever a situation where you got fatigued, either due to work or due to your rum ration, sleep is a way to recover it immediately. Gamble is a way to kind of just do some entertainment and possibly get some money. It's not really much money, it's just more for showing off. Entertain, which is just to entertain the crew, which I don't know if that's actually doing anything, but I've been doing it a lot. Influence is, of course, you can just get another opportunity to talk to various NPCs. Usually, it's, since we're kind of just the lowest of the low, during nighttime, the only people you can really talk to is other swabs and riggers. Talking to officers is just not something that's viable in most cases. You can do a sneak, which is a you can explore an area of the ship, though you do risk being detected. And you can do a take 20 on a perception check to search even more thoroughly, but it involves more stealth checks. You can also attempt to open a locked door or locker, but you have to make a stealth check to avoid being discovered. And yeah, out of all of them, stealing is generally the harshest thing that you can do, and has the harshest consequences. In fact, to kind of show it off in the beginning, there was one person that got keelhauled simply because he stole. Anyway, and there's some stuff about detection and various games of chance and stuff. Nothing too special. It's nothing I really need to go into. So we'll go ahead and close that. And okay, these are rum rations. Essentially, we have to take it every time. He's made some tweaks to the rules that were in the adventure because it was kind of a downward spiral. Because eventually you'll just end up drunk and unable to do anything. So your options for rum rations is you can do a stealth check at DC 10 to just dump it, in which case, if you fail it, you'll take lashings. For those who don't understand, the way rum rations work is essentially the way this pirate crew is running is they keep you busy during the day, working, and then at nights they keep you drunk. They keep you from, thinking too much. So the idea is just keep you guys exhausted and drunk so you guys can't do anything besides follow orders, which is a bit debilitating. So what we're doing is various actions to kind of make sure we don't, get drunk. So usually a common action is to do a sip and make grog, which is essentially where you're trying to water down the alcohol to make it so it's something you get to handle a little bit better. It's a DC 10 fort save. If you fail, you become fatigued. But if you decide to take your sleep action, that just negates it. So this is pretty much the safest action to take because the failure result is just you lose an action. And then the last option, of course, is you can drink deeply in Skull, like a true pirate, I guess you can say. It's DC 15 fort save. If you fail, it's 1d3 minus 1 con damage. But you also get 1d4 alchemical bonus to charisma for 8 hours, pass or failure. And the next morning, the player character must make a DC 10 will save or be fatigued until the PC can rest 8 hours. This is a poison effect. So, yeah, you can give yourself a temporary bonus in charisma at the cost of getting some con damage and fatigue. And that's the gist of that. Also, just kind of show off the crew so far. There's a few spoilers there. I apologize. But essentially, there's a whole bunch of officers of various things. It's right now being run by Barnus Harrigan. Most of our encounters involve Mr. Plug, as well as Master Scourge. Master Scourge kind of runs everything as far as like giving out orders and jobs and stuff. Pretty much, he's the one that's going to be lashing us if we screw up and things like that. And there's also a bunch of crew members. There's a lot of them. I'll be bringing up this list often. Sometimes I'll highlight specific characters if we're talking about them. But yeah, it's a big crew. There is one dead character that got killed on day 1. And also, we got a nice little table here that kind of shows general attitudes towards the PCs. Obviously, we're trying to make this, try to get as many friends as possible. Obviously, various actions we do will influence various people's attitudes and things like that. So, yeah, it's also you can see everyone's jobs and all that good stuff. Anyway, I think that's about the gist of it. So I'm going to go ahead and just talk about what the first session involved, or tried to involve. So essentially, we all woke up. As you can see, there's the boat. The way the boat's set up is it's by floor. So there's top floor, which is a little bit mixed. There's top floor. Then there's the rooms inside the top floor. Then there's the floor down, and then the bilges down here. So we'll be switching through these different floors over and over again. As you can see, it's a very, very small ship, and there's about 30 plus people in here. So it's a very, very crowded. But in any case, we pretty much woke up in here. All 4 of us. We met Scourge, and we proceeded to do various tasks. For the they brought us to top deck, introduced the captain introduced himself, and then it was like, "Yep, you're working for me. I don't want to hear from any of you guys," and that's it. At that point, Scourge kind of took over and gave some various tests to kind of decide what to do with the various crew members. Essentially, there was a test involving climbing the rigging and stuff, and it involved a lot of like athletics checks and other things. And whoever got to the top first essentially became a rigger rather than a swab. The person that won that was Cahoon. Cahoon's stats were freaking through the roof when it came to athletics. Then after that, everyone kind of was gathered around in the kitchen, and pretty much the question was, can you cook? And if anyone said yes, they would have became the cook. Unfortunately, no one did, and so some NPC was designated as the cook. And that was pretty much it. Everyone else was set to swabs. So my character and Marcus and Ragnar. By the way, my character is Ashira. She is an elven witch. So pretty standard stuff. Cahoon is a fighter, I believe. Yeah, I believe Cahoon is a fighter. We can check real quick. Actually, I can't check right now. Cahoon, I believe, is a fighter. Marcus, I believe, is a gunslinger. And Ragnar is a swashbuckler. So kind of an interesting little group. As for how I'm playing my witch, I'm kind of more support-based, which is probably a good thing at this point in the game. So I have a lot more hexes that are more focused towards healing and things like that rather than debuffs. And yeah, that's probably the gist of it. Anyway, so Cahoon became a rigger. Everyone else became swabs, and we kind of just did our ship actions, and then for our nightly action, we kind of just did our rum ration. Marcus won a arm wrestling match. Well, no, he didn't. It wasn't arm wrestling. It was a drinking match, which pretty much just like plastered him. His con damage was through the roof because of all the drinking he did. Um, Beyond that, I tried to do some entertainment and rolled a natural one. And everyone else, I don't even remember what they did. Probably nothing important. So that was kind of like the end of day one. Then day two, when we woke up, we ran into a particular group of characters. It was Slippery Still, who's a human female who's apparently a psychopath. Also during day one, Jake's Magpie was in the bilges. He was held in the bilges. That's where I actually did my first swabbing task, is going into the bilges, which is an awful place to be in. It's essentially the bottom of the ship where it's like filled with water and has like disgusting things in it. And pretty much I was cleaning that area up. But Jake's Magpie was there. He was caught stealing, and so he ended up being keel hauled, and that pretty much killed him. So he's dead, and that's why I usually make jokes about him. But anyway, Slippery Still, on the start of day two, we were going to go up to get our task and all that. And Slippery Still and three other characters, I believe it was Jaundice Jape, who's a half-orc male, Phipps Chumlet, who's a human male, and then a Areta Banshin, who's a human female. They were just waiting for us and decided to throw a fist fight. There wasn't much to talk about the fist fight. Cahoon and Marcus flat out just knocked someone down right in the start of the battle, and then I ran past them and tried to talk to Scourge and be like, "Hey, they're fighting down here," but he didn't seem to care. Ragnar decided to just dance while three guys started beating him up. He earned a hero point because Wes gave him a challenge where if he danced the entire fight and didn't get knocked unconscious, he would get a hero point. So he did. During the entire thing, Cahoon and Marcus beat up the other three characters, and that was pretty much it. So essentially, Slippery Still is kind of like the character that's out to get us for some reason. Probably just doesn't like us, or just doesn't like Ashira for some reason. But yeah, so we ended up getting lashings at the end of day two, which pretty much knocked most of us unconscious. So we couldn't do anything at the night of day two. The only thing to point out about day two that happened is the person that was drafted to be the cook, the NPC character, was a horrible cook. And so supposedly this was random, but I was lucky enough to be picked. Ashira, which is my character, got picked to be the cook. And so I got to meet up with the cookmaster, who is, what's his name? Ambrose Coop, which he's nicknamed Fish Guts. He's supposedly not a good cook, but he does run the cook, and he does run the kitchen, and he's kind of left alone, which is always good. So I've been working with him, which is actually really convenient for my character, because my character is not very physical-based. So doing more of the cook-type role stuff is probably for the best. Besides that, I think that's about it. As for my first cooking action, it was literally just cooking, but what's kind of interesting about this campaign, as far as the jobs are concerned, when it comes to the cook jobs, when it comes to the some of the random checks, obviously involves cooking, but those days, how much cooking you actually have to do is based off how drunk Fish Guts is. So if he's very drunk, that means you're left doing all the work. Well, so far I've been really lucky with it. So for the first time working with him, he was completely sober, and so he did all the work pretty much for me, and I got extra ship actions, so I got to talk to him and look around a bit more. Yeah, and yeah, that's pretty much it. As for the ship actions, there wasn't really much to point out. Some people tried to talk to some people. We got introduced. We definitely got introduced to Sandara Quinn, who's a swab. She was probably the nicest person on the crew so far because she started out helpful. She is actually a priestess of Besmara, which is the pirate goddess type thing. So she's kind of a healer, though she kind of keeps that on the down low. But she's been very helpful and kind of gave us the lowdown about exactly who's on the ship and all that, which is kind of what also why I didn't really show the recording, because it was just mostly just reciting a whole lot of NPC names, because there's a lot of NPCs on the ship. As for the NPCs on the ship, for the most part, they don't appear on the ship unless they're needed, because it's just too many tokens to keep track of. And yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. As for the conversations, as for the ship actions, like I mentioned before, I was in the bilges, which is down here. I couldn't really do anything. So I think I did on day one, I think I just did an influence, or not an influence, I did a search, I think, if that. I don't even remember if we even got the ship actions on day one. We probably didn't. That's probably why I don't remember them. As for day two, my ship actions, I had 2 of them because of the fact that Fish Guts did all the cooking for me. Pretty much my action was to influence Fish Guts, so I kind of just had a conversation with them. And then my second action is I actually did a search of the kitchen just to see what we got. Now, something that was kind of interesting about my class is, as a witch, anyone that's familiar with any sort of D&D games knows that wizards and those types of classes generally have to memorize their spells. Wizards have to use like a spell book. Clerics have to pray type thing. Witches actually have their spells stored on their familiar, which mine is a raven, which can speak Elven. But obviously, I couldn't really get access to my raven, at least not without drawing attention, because obviously I don't want to reveal that I'm a witch on a ship. So I've been very concerned about not being able to memorize spells. So I have spells in memory, but I haven't really casted them. I've been relying more on hexes. Also, since I don't have my spell component pouch, I can't actually cast most of my spells. I can cast Cure Light Wounds, and that's about it. But yeah, so that's some just things to point out. As for ship actions, if you have a custom action, it's really just between you and the DM. Like, for example, some of the actions I kind of wanted to do was talk to my familiar, which is a little bit different. For the most part, I think we classified it as just an influence action. Anyway, this was a bit rambly, so I apologize, but I kind of just wanted to give a thorough explanation of what we're doing, the playthrough itself, as well as kind of a summary of the first session. Like I mentioned, at the end of day 2, most of us were knocked unconscious from lashes. There wasn't much we could do about it. But the good news is Ashera became a cook, which is very, very helpful. Now, one final thing I got to go ahead and point out for those who don't know. These are military friends of mine, so our humor can be very crude. It's mostly just all in fun and games. We're pretty good people. So I mean, well, take that for what you will. I consider myself pretty awful. Anyway, so yeah, if you have issues with very crude military humor type stuff, that just consider this your forewarning. Anyway, I think that's about it. So I'm gonna go ahead and call this a video. When we come back, it should be just regular, just playthroughs type stuff. One thing I will go ahead and warn about as well is some of my longer sections of recordings. My audio gets desynced a little bit. So if it sounds like I'm talking over a lot of people, it's probably due to audio desync. Because I usually try not to talk over people too much, but due to the audio desync, it seems to make my dialogue overlap other people's. So if you've noticed some of that happening, just be aware. I think it's really just in part of one of the other parts, though. Anyway, I am the Depressed Dealer. This is Pathfinder, Skulls and Shackles, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. See you guys.